In the hallowed silence of Arlington National Cemetery, where heroes rest, one privileged teen saw only a stage for his arrogance. He chose to challenge a Tomb Sentinel. He never imagined the Sentinel would respond. The July sun beat down on the white marble plaza of the tomb of the unknown soldier, a heat so intense it seemed to demand the hallowed silence that reigned over Arlington National Cemetery. Here, amidst the endless rows of identical headstones, the air itself felt heavy with reverence. Tourists gathered behind brass stanchions, their voices hushed, their movements respectful. They were witnesses to a sacred ritual, a living tribute to the unidentified soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice. At the center of this solemn stage was Sergeant Elias Vance of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard. At 30 years old, he was a seasoned Tomb Sentinel, his face a mask of impenetrable focus carved from years of discipline. Every line of his immaculate dress blues uniform was perfect, every brass button gleamed, and every movement was a study in precision. 21 steps. Turn. Face the tomb for 21 seconds. Turn again. It was a rhythm he had perfected, a walking meditation that honored the fallen and shielded him from the world outside. His service wasn't just ceremonial, it was a sacred trust, earned through 2 combat tours where the silence was broken by anything but peace. Among the silent crowd, the Sterling family from California was a pocket of jarring dissonance. Harrison Sterling, a tech mogul, was glued to his phone, his thumbs scrolling through stock tickers as if the sacred ground were just another airport lounge. His wife, Chloe, fanned her face with a brochure, her expression one of polite boredom. Between them stood their 12-year-old son, Leo. Dressed in a designer hoodie despite the sweltering heat and wearing limited edition sneakers that cost more than a soldier's monthly pay, Leo radiated a restless energy that was fundamentally at odds with the setting. "This is so boring," he announced, his voice slicing through the quiet. "Why are we just watching a guy walk back and forth? Can't we go see the monuments with the pools?" Chloe shushed him weakly. "Leo, darling, people are watching. I don't care. It's hot, and he's not even doing anything cool." Disapproving glances darted their way, but the Sterlings were insulated by a fortress of wealth and indifference. Leo, emboldened by a lifetime of unchecked whims, decided to create his own entertainment. He began to mimic Sergeant Vance's solemn walk, taking clumsy, exaggerated steps and making a goofy, puffing sound with his cheeks. A few stifled gasps rippled through the crowd. Leo just smirked. He was finally getting a reaction. The crowd's disapproval was a tangible thing, a wave of collective shame that washed over the plaza. Parents pulled their own children closer, whispering reminders about respect. An elderly man in a Vietnam veteran cap shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment on his face. Near him stood a woman in her late 60s, her dress simple, a small, gold star pinned to her lapel. Her hands were clasped tightly, and upon seeing Leo's mockery, her expression wasn't anger, but a deep, personal pain, as if an old wound had been carelessly prodded. She was a Gold Star mother, and this ground was not a tourist stop for her, it was the final resting place of a promise. Leo saw none of this. He saw only a challenge. The Sentinel's unresponsiveness was not a sign of discipline to him, but of weakness. His parents, Harrison and Chloe, had finally disengaged from their devices, but only to watch their son's performance with a kind of detached amusement, misinterpreting the crowd's horror as attention. "I bet I can make him laugh," Leo whispered loudly to his mother, who just waved a dismissive hand. Frustration curdled into recklessness. The brass chain separating the crowd from the patrol mat was a clear boundary, a line between the sacred and the profane. To Leo, it was just a velvet rope at a club he was determined to enter. With a sly grin, he ducked under it. A collective, audible gasp swept through the onlookers. "Get back here," someone hissed. But it was too late. Leo was on the mat, his gaudy sneakers treading on the same hallowed ground the Sentinels kept pristine. He strode directly toward Sergeant Vance, who had just completed his turn and was now standing perfectly still, facing the tomb. The Sentinel's eyes remained fixed, but every fiber of his being was on high alert. This was no longer a disturbance, it was an incursion. Standing just a few feet away, Leo reached into his pocket and pulled out a bottle. It wasn't water. It was a lurid, almost radioactive green energy drink. With a theatrical flourish, he unscrewed the cap. The crowd watched in frozen disbelief as he tipped the bottle and poured its entire sticky, fluorescent contents onto Sergeant Vance's immaculately shined, black leather boots. The green liquid splashed onto the white marble, pooling around the Sentinel's feet like a toxic spill. The sickly sweet smell of artificial fruit cut through the summer air, a final, vulgar insult. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the plaza, heavier and more absolute than before. In that frozen moment, Sergeant Elias Vance's mind was a whirlwind. Years of training screamed at him to remain motionless, a living statue of stoicism. But the soldier inside him, the man who had faced down real threats and understood the meaning of a desecrated symbol, was at war with the Sentinel. He felt the sticky liquid seeping into the seams of his boots, a minor physical discomfort that represented a catastrophic breach of honor. The only outward sign of the storm within was the sudden, rigid clenching of his jaw. Leo stood there, a triumphant smirk on his face, waiting for the applause or laughter he felt he'd earned. He got neither. Before the nearby cemetery guards could even begin to move, Vance acted. He did not turn his body. He did not break his posture. But from him came a voice that was not loud but carried the weight of battlefield commands. It cut through the thick, humid air like a razor. Step back behind the line. Immediately. The tone was flat, devoid of emotion, yet it held an absolute authority that made several tourists instinctively flinch. This was not the voice of a performer, it was the voice of a predator telling a lesser creature it had made a fatal mistake. For a split second, Leo was stunned into silence, his smirk faltering. But a lifetime of entitlement had taught him that all authority could be challenged. Or what? He shot back, his voice cracking slightly. You can't touch me. You're just a guard. A glorified statue. The crowd's collective intake of breath was sharp. His parents had finally jolted to full attention. Leo! Chloe cried, her voice high with panic. Get back here now. Harrison Sterling's face reddened with annoyance, not at his son, but at the escalating scene. But Leo was beyond listening. He was doubling down, reaching into his hoodie pocket. He pulled out his smartphone. This is going on my TikTok, he announced, turning his back slightly to frame the shot. Me, the statue, and his green goo boots. #guard fail. He angled the phone to capture his own grinning face, the Sentinel's stoic profile, and the evidence of his transgression. That was the final desecration. Treating this sacred duty, this man, this uniform, as a prop for social media clout was a line that could not be uncrossed. Faster than anyone could process, Sergeant Vance moved. It wasn't a clumsy, angry swing. It was a single, fluid motion of military precision, an extension of the arm, a sharp, calculated tap of his gloved fingers against the top of the phone. The device flew from Leo's grasp, tumbling through the air. It landed face down on the granite plaza with a sickening crack that echoed like a gunshot in the silence. The screen spiderwebbed into 1,000 pieces. The epic response had been delivered. The sound of the shattering phone broke the spell. Leo stared at the destroyed device, his connection to his world, and let out a piercing shriek. It wasn't a cry of pain, but of pure, unadulterated indignation. You broke my phone. That's a $2,000 phone. You're going to pay for that. Suddenly, Harrison Sterling was in motion, his face purple with rage. The passive observer was gone, replaced by the CEO on the warpath. This is assault, he boomed, striding toward the stanchions. Assault and destruction of property. I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the embassy. Do you have any idea who I am? Before he could cross the line, 2 uniformed cemetery guards intercepted him. They were calm but immovable. At the same time, a woman with a steely gaze and an air of absolute command arrived. Her crisp uniform bore the insignia of a retired army colonel. This was Superintendent Eva Rostova, the head of Arlington National Cemetery. "Mr. Sterling, I presume," she said, her voice quiet but firm, completely cutting through his tirade. "I suggest you lower your voice. Your man just assaulted my son." Harrison sputtered. Rostova's eyes, which had seen far worse things than a rich man's tantrum, did not blink. "Sir, your son crossed a restricted barrier, interfered with a military ceremony, and deliberately defiled the uniform of a United States soldier guarding a national shrine. What my sentinel did was de-escalate a situation your son created." Just then, another figure arrived, Captain Miller, Sergeant Vance's direct commanding officer. He walked straight to his sentinel, received a brief, factual report, and then stood beside him, a silent, unwavering wall of support. The power dynamic on the plaza had irrevocably shifted. The Sterlings were suddenly confronted by an authority that their money could not buy, their influence could not touch, and their threats could not intimidate. This was the United States military and the sanctity of its most revered ground. "This is not a customer service complaint, Mr. Sterling," Rostova continued, her tone chillingly calm. "This is a federal matter. Your son's actions could be interpreted as the desecration of a national monument. Your nationality does not grant you immunity here. In fact, it makes this display all the more egregious." She turned and spoke into her radio, her words sealing their fate. "Dispatch, I have a situation at the tomb. We will require federal law enforcement assistance." Within the hour, the incident had exploded beyond the confines of Arlington. The dozens of cell phone videos had gone viral. The hashtag #ArlingtonBrat was trending worldwide on Twitter. News vans with satellite dishes were parked on the perimeter of the cemetery, their reporters doing live stand-ups. The story was leading newscasts in America and abroad. The narrative was overwhelmingly unified. Snippets of online comments painted a stark picture: "That kid needs a lesson in respect. Good on that soldier. As a veteran, this makes my blood boil. Thank you to that sentinel for his restraint. The parents are just as bad, letting him act like that." The most powerful response, however, was silent. A small group of about 20 veterans, some elderly in wheelchairs, others younger with the visible and invisible scars of recent wars, had gathered at the cemetery entrance. They didn't chant or hold signs. They simply stood, their posture straight, their presence a quiet, formidable testament of support for Sergeant Vance and what he represented. The Sterlings were escorted to a sterile administrative office, the reality of their situation crashing down on them. The embassy representative who arrived was polite but blunt. "The embassy cannot and will not interfere with U.S. federal law enforcement," she told them. "Your son is on American soil, and he is subject to its laws." Harrison's frantic calls to his lawyers were met with grim assessments. Chloe's social media was a toxic wasteland of furious comments, forcing her to delete her accounts. The Sterling name, once a symbol of success, was now synonymous with arrogance and disrespect. Then, Dr. Anya Evans arrived. A renowned child psychologist who specialized in youth behavioral interventions, she had been called in by the authorities. She observed Leo, who was now sullen and silent, and his frantic parents. She saw the pattern instantly. In a calm, private meeting, she bypassed the legal jargon and spoke to the heart of the matter. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling," she began, her voice gentle but firm. "We are not just dealing with a broken phone or spilled soda. We are dealing with a profound lack of empathy and respect. This is a behavioral crisis." She explained they were at a crossroads. Option 1 is the formal route, juvenile court, with potential charges of trespassing and desecration of a venerated object. This will follow him for life. Option 2, she paused, letting the weight of her words sink in, is a comprehensive, non-negotiable educational intervention that I will personally design and oversee. It will be difficult, and it will be long. The choice is yours. For the first time, Harrison and Chloe Sterling were speechless. Their privilege had finally hit a wall it could not climb. 3 weeks later, the boy in the designer hoodie was gone. In his place was a subdued 12-year-old named Leo, dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans, scrubbing the floor of a physical therapy room at a VA hospital in Washington, D.C. The scent of antiseptic had replaced the sickly sweet smell of his energy drink. His community service was not about punishment, but about perspective. For hours each day, he listened. He sat with a 90-year-old who had stormed the beaches of Normandy. He played checkers with a young Marine who had lost both legs in Afghanistan. They didn't lecture him, they simply told him their stories, of camaraderie, of fear, of duty, and of the friends who never came home. They spoke of the uniform not as a costume, but as a promise. One afternoon, a retired sergeant in a wheelchair, a man who hadn't spoken more than 2 words to him all week, watched him work. "Why are you here, son?" he asked, his voice raspy. Leo stopped scrubbing and looked the man in the eye. "Because I did something stupid," he said, his voice quiet with shame. "I disrespected a soldier." The sergeant nodded slowly. "Well," he said. "At least you know." The final step of his intervention was a meeting arranged by Dr. Evans. In a quiet park, Elias Vance, now in civilian clothes, was waiting on a bench. He looked different without his uniform, more human, but his posture was still ramrod straight. Leo approached him, his hands trembling slightly. "Sergeant Vance," he began, his voice steady. "I want to apologize. Not because I have to. Because I get it now. I didn't see you. I just saw a thing in a uniform. I didn't understand what that uniform meant, or what it cost. And I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for the disrespect I showed you, and everyone you represent." Vance listened, his gaze evaluative. He saw the sincerity in the boy's eyes. He extended his hand. "Honor is heavy, kid," Vance said, his voice softer now. "Now you're learning how to carry it." Leo shook his hand, a firm, genuine grip. It wasn't a conclusion, but a beginning. Months later, an anonymous donation was made to a charity supporting Gold Star families. It wasn't a large sum by sterling standards, but for the boy who made it from his own allowance, it was everything. He was finally learning. The internet was quick to judge Leo, but his story didn't end with a shattered phone. What do you think about the power of second chances and the lessons learned from our worst mistakes? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in the importance of respect for those who serve, share this story. Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that make you think. Please, always comment with respect for everyone involved in the story.